30 and unders.
No, it's not even that. Two of my three kids are over 30, but they're very much in that generation.
Okay, so researching your house, good deal. So why would you want to research your house? Here are some of the reasons that I've heard. When was it built? Who were the original owners? Who designed it? Who built it? And any interesting history. And some items to note, to clarify before we begin. Urban houses, those houses within the Waterson Expressway, are fairly easy to research. But those outside the Waterson Expressway sometimes can be a lot more challenging to research, just because the inner beltway was established in the 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of history written on those, and then as they expanded out beyond the Waterson Expressway, not so much information on those. Everyone asks about, do we have an architectural drawing of your house? The only architectural drawing archives that we have is at the Filson Historical Society, and they only keep archives of really notable landmark legendary architects. They don't have a whole treasure trove of drawings there. So most likely you don't have any drawings of your house. And most architects don't design houses. And as I say, like almost 100% of the houses are not designed by architects. So
Who does it?
builders, developers, drafters. An architect may design one house and then the builder takes it and does prototypes off of it. But yeah, there's not most, and a house does not require it to be a stamped, registered license to be built. Whereas commercial buildings like libraries and all do require architects, but houses do not. Yeah, go ahead.
Does that have to be stamped by an engineer?
No. I guess it all depends on the type or structure of the house. Now, some of these homes get pretty large. There was that one out there that was just built off US 42 that looks like a hotel. And they more than likely had an architect and structural engineer involved. But that's the 0.1% of houses that are like that. And we won't really get into deed research that much. We'll talk a little bit about that. And as noted, research can be very frustrating even for the most experienced historian.
Glad you put that one last.
It's challenging, yes. Now, in deed research, Jefferson County Clerk just came out with a website recently where you can go online to search deeds, but it only goes back to 1984, I understand. And plus, you need all sorts of other related information to find your deed. Deed research can be very complicated. That's why a lot of people hire people to do the deed research. If you've ever been down to the deed room down at the courthouse, it's very challenging, yes.
Yeah, my house was built in 1883, and I moved in there in 78, and I actually did see the original deed. And then there was a big flood. I went back a few years later to look at some facts on the deed again, and they said that that whole area where those old deeds were stored was flooded, and they've all been thrown away. So, I mean, I'm just out of luck.
Right. Yeah, and you go down and ask the staff to help you out, and they will not help you out.
No, they won't.
So,
except to say they're gone, they're flooded out.
So.
Does it only through 1984, does that mean it only goes back to 1984?
Right, if your house was built in 1984, or, yeah, it only goes, you can only deed research back via that website.
So nothing before 84?
Right,
Okay.
so it's really not that good, but obviously in 100 years from now, it will be of value, but right now it's unless they go and maybe they are adding to that, yeah, they may be continuing to add to it, but right now that's as far back.
I found out the original price of my house was $200.
So I will be using my own house for research as an example this evening, and so I'll be referring back to this. And by the way, that is an older photograph. I was looking at it tonight. My roof is now black, and the car has been updated. So that's an old photograph. So one of the first things, if you haven't done it already, is to Google your street address and see what pops up. And you may, while you're at it, Google your own name to find out what pops up too. If you've not done that, it's always an interesting thing to see what's out there online about you, if you haven't done it already. And here's what I've done when I Google myself. In fact, there on the right, it gives my daughter's ages and where they live and all that. I mean, this is all public knowledge. A lot of people think that you can go offline and no one knows about you, but you're out there somewhere online. And then on the left, all of the various references about my house, the realtor websites. Almost every house, I want to say 100% of the houses in Jefferson County have a Zillow or Redfin or realtor information on your house. The realtors have been very dedicated to putting all that stuff online. And here's my Zillow information here. And it talks about when my house was built in 1928. Actually, I have a plumbing inspection certificate in my basement. It says 1929 is when the plumbing was inspected. So it was probably started in 28 and finished in 29. Some of the information's not quite right. It says I have a 1-bedroom. I actually have a 5-bedroom. It says I have 1 bath. I have 4 baths. So, you know, some of it's not quite right, but I'm not going into
Update.
But regardless, it gives you some basic information. And all. So. And you can go to your friendly library. You probably walked past them as you came in today, all the computers that they have set up. And one of the fascinating sites that they have is the Jefferson County PVA, Property Value Administration folks. And this one gives you a lot of information. Now the PVA, you can go on PVA at your house computer, but if you have not paid for the premium service, you don't get all the information that this will provide you. This gives you all sorts of additional info on it.
That's good, yeah, I run into
Good to
that
know.
many places and never thought that.
Yeah, the library has a subscription to the PVA, and so it gives you all sorts of data. So here's what's on mine. Gives you all sorts of additional information, what the value of the house is and all of that. What's very interesting is they actually have a house plan of my house on it. How they did that, I have no idea, but talks all sorts of information.
I mean, that looks like a survey.
Yeah,
That's about what the detail that's on my house survey is.
yeah. Who did that? But I'll show you another example later on where they had that done. But yeah, you can actually get your plan and your dimensions off of the PVA survey.
Could some of that have come from the old Sanborn maps?
No, and I'll talk about Sanborn here. Let me talk about Sanborn when we get to that. So another good place to research is down at the main library. These city directories that they have are just phenomenal data information. I'm in here a lot looking at these. They have them. They have hard copy books, as I note there. By the way, these are in the Kentucky room. They're in the original building up on the 2nd floor. And the staff would be very friendly if you ask them where are the street directories or how you use these. They'll help you out. The hard copy books go from 1925 up to today. They have street directories up to today. I also know to go on Sundays when it's less crowded and it's free on the parking meters. So and then you can also go to libraries here and get on the street directories as well. If you click on this icon here, the Kentucky History Research icon, the little green tree, it'll take you to the city directories menu there. And then it provides you all of these street directories from, 1885 down to 1941. You can get to the street directories there. Those prior to 1885, you have to go down to the main library and access those. But anyways, these are always great information. Again, you can get those right up front here. So what sort of information do you get from a street directory? Well, here is my house again. It talks about who owned the house, Willis and Hazel.
Roth.
Rolfe, thank you. And it says that he worked at Standard Oil Company. So it gives you actually the employment of who the person was that owned the thing. Now, what I always tell people in street directories is you take your address and then you go into the directory and you go, I say start around, if you kind of know in general when your house was built, let's say it was 1900, go to like 1905 and see if the house exists then go to 1900. If it's not in 1900, or if it's still listed at 1900, go to 1895. Go to when it stops showing up, and then kind of backtrack it a little bit, and find the year in which it first shows up. Let's say it shows up in 1896 in the street directory. That usually means that in 1895 the house was built. So we backtrack the street directories by year to find out when that address disappears, and when it disappears, that means normally your house was built that year. And that's sort of what I did with this as well. And you can find out who the original owner was, where they might have worked, and some other information that might be on there as well. But it's an excellent resource. And so I found out that Willis Roth worked at Standard Oil Building. Here's the Standard Oil Building where he more than likely worked. It's now part of the University of Louisville. It's an academic building now. The other thing that we want to do is go to the Courier-Journal archives, and let me get something out here real fast. A little water so we don't get too parched doing this. So again, getting on the library website out here, you click on Research Tools, and then you click on Newspapers. Hopefully some of you have done this. I hope you've already done this. Then there's several Courier-Journal entries here, and you want to use the one that is from 1830 to 2000. Do not use the one that says 2000 to 2008, and even the ones more recent, you have to go to a different website. So if you're looking for a house history, though, the one that says 1830 to 2000 is the one that you want to click on to start researching. Of course, you need your library card to do this. And hopefully everyone has got onto the library website and know how to insert your card number and your password and all that. If you don't know what your password is, you just email the library or whatever. I think there's a way that you contact them and they'll send you the password.
Yeah,
On
I
there.
had that problem. I think you hit the link and they send you an email with the password.
With the password. It's been a few years since I did this, so but I know that you do need your library card, your barcode number, and all that. Then this web page comes up, a little search engine here, and this is where it could be kind of frustrating finding out the right keywords to put in. Usually you'll want to put in your address, any information that hopefully you might have the original owner's name by now. But try to start playing around with the search engine to find out, come up with some things on your house. And so this would, once you do put in that information, a whole menu of links pops up relating to whatever you're searching for. And this can be fairly frustrating. You can go through several pages of this. It will print out dozens, maybe hundreds of links to click on, and I always am constantly, once it doesn't show up immediately, I'm constantly tinkering with the search terms to find exactly what I'm trying to find. It can be frustrating. You can also do it within a date range here. If you know when your house might have been built, say it was built in 1900, so maybe you set your date range between 1895 to 1905, narrow the scope of your search in that manner. And here's one of the things that I was able to do. I was able to find all of the for sale ads for my house. And this stuff is very valuable. It tells you a lot about the house, how they marketed it and everything. And see, I did not know who my designer or builder was, but it was on here. There's the designer builder listed.
How long have you lived on Reed Lane?
I've been there over 30 years.
My aunt and uncle lived at University in Reed.
Yeah.
96.
So Emery Kincaid, and if you know anything about Reed Lawn, where I live, Emery is one of the street names there. But anyways, so good information. Even though you're coming up with these for sale ads, save them, because there could be a wealth of information that you're not immediately seeing once you do that. So it tells all sorts of information. Note this. it says it does have a 2-car garage, whereas on Zillow, it lists I have a 1-car garage. Why, I don't know.
Yeah, you live there.
And I also did obituaries. You can search obituaries on the Courier Journal archives. I'm constantly searching obituaries, and this is the guy that developed Read Learn and his obituary and all that there. Fascinating stuff.
What would you, other than just curiosity, what would researching the obituaries?
Well, I still have some more information on
I'm
that.
sorry, okay.
So here's the next obituaries. I looked up my owners' obituaries, who built my house, or who were the original owners. Talks a lot about Willis Rolfe. He passed away when he was, 54 years old. His wife lived to 100, and they're buried in Cave Hill Cemetery. I'll show you that shortly. But talks about him at Standard Oil. Gives you a lot of information about him, about the original owners of my house. So obituaries to me are very vital. Also came across the Courier Journal. They had listed their marriage license, where they got married, in Edinburgh, Indiana, is at this church. And again, I being a historian, this stuff fascinated me, but this may be information that you do not want to research, but I find it fascinating that Mrs. Rolfe was from Chicago, and so she moved down here to Louisville to be with Mr. Rolfe. And it also said that their first house was on South Floyd Street, 1411 South Floyd. That's their first house.
Cute house.
Yeah. So then I visited the cemetery where they were buried. And again, I'm just showing you different paths that you can do to find out your house history. Cave Hill Cemetery has a great search engine there that you can go in and search up burial records. You put in the name. Here I put in Willis Rolfe information, and on there it actually shows you where he's buried at. Obviously Mrs. Rolfe is adjacent to him there. Here's her listing there. So, but what's also good about going to the cemetery is you see other relatives that are buried near them. You find out more about their families when you do that. And here's their headstones. Hazel actually was 10 years older than Willis.
Wow.
Yeah. And all cemeteries pretty much now have search engines on them. The Catholic cemeteries have those as well. Let me see, on the Catholic cemeteries you have to go into visitor information up here and then locate a loved one is their link. And then the Jewish cemeteries have similar information, cemetery search.
Yeah, actually, Meyer and Son has all of them.
Yeah. So it's all, yeah, I love it. It's fantastic. You know, you just sit, you do this at home. You don't have to go out to the cemeteries to do this. So now then, I found out that the Rolfes, after they moved from South Floyd, they moved here to 100 North 46th Street. When I was doing my street directory search, I found out that they lived here prior to coming to the house that I own now. And so they lived way over here in the West End, and then they moved way over to the East End. So the question that I had as a historian, why did they move? Why would they have moved in the mid-1930s? This was prior to the 1937 flood, which would have required them to move. They were fortunate they moved prior to that. But anyways, why would they have moved? And so this is some of the history that sometimes you find good history and sometimes you find unfortunate history. And this was an unfortunate history of the Rolfe family because their son was killed by a city bus. He was 12 years old, I think it was. And very sad, and he was a Boy Scout and all that, and you know, just kind of, you know, when you get into house histories, it's unfortunate. But yeah, they no longer wanted to live where their son had been killed. By the way, this was all during the Depression. You'll notice they moved after 1934. The house sat vacant for several years because it was the Depression era. They couldn't sell the house. I understood they rented it out, perhaps. But it was not sold to the Rolfes till after 34.
Interesting way to phrase what happened. Wheel of street railway vehicle passes over lab.
Yeah, can you imagine?
So I think it was probably a streetcar.
That
So,
was a streetcar, yeah.
Yeah.
Did additional research. I got his death certificate here, the obituary there on him. And I visited the gravesite there at Cave Hill. He's buried in his grandparents' lot.
Boy Scout.
You know, if it would have been me, he probably should have been reburied next to his father. His father's Willis is buried in another section of the cemetery, but he's here with his grandparents.
I mean, at that point, his father probably expected to live another 30 years, didn't own a lot.
Yeah.
Grandparents were there.
So you never know what you're going to find in your house histories, but it is, that's what pops up sometimes, unfortunately. Now then, the other good thing about doing research is a lot of the neighborhoods have great history books on the neighborhoods, and I know there's several over here that Beth has set out for you to look at, but here are a few that I have. Some of these are just phenomenal. The one on Cherokee Cherokee Triangle history, it's a very thin pamphlet, but just chocked full of stuff. And then Valley Station, Southwest Jefferson County, is a very valuable book. I think they still sell that at the Farnsley Mormon House. They reprinted it and they use it out there. But all these books contain house histories within them. And if you go down to the main library, they have them down there as well. Here, all these books are neighborhood histories. And genealogy books as well. There's just a wealth of information at your downtown library with all that information. Here's a house. So when the Louisville Historical League, we were doing a tour of Germantown last fall, and we passed by this house, and the tour leader who lives in Germantown said, "Steve, what do you know about this house here? You know, we always wonder what the history of this home is." And so I asked my Louisville Historical League historian group if anyone knew about it, and someone said, yes, it's in a house history book. And this was it. It's called Walks Through Germantown. It was written by Natalie Andrews and Carol Aiken. This was back in the mid-1970s, and talked about the whole history of that house. What was interesting about it is the street address had changed from St. Catherine. It was originally 1059 Kane Street,
Interesting.
and and that's the other issue that you would have in looking at the street directories. And in 1909, they changed street names, they changed addresses, all sorts of things happened around 1909. So usually I tell people, go find 1909 street directory, find your current address, it'll be listed there, but it also lists the previous address as well. It's sort of a Rosetta Stone of street addresses in Louisville.
So what happened in 1909 that made everything change?
I think they were just trying to rectify things. I know Portland had a whole different street numbering system than Louisville did, and at one point they all said, we've got to make this all work. And by Portland being, it was once a separate city, so it had its own street numbering system and names, and I think that's what necessitated, let's get our act together, and all the street numbers changed. But that was an interesting find there. That was originally 1059 Kane Street.
Well, this was
Yeah.
probably more well outside the Watterson, but when they changed the addresses for Universal 911, that was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I assume. I'm guessing you probably haven't had to look at those because they would be outside. But
Fortunately, a lot of
I lived in a house that had its address changed.
you know, yeah, it's horrible when they change addresses and numbers and all. It's complicates life a lot. And so here is the whole information on that house, but it was contained in a house history of Germantown that we were able to identify. So, and even I can be a resource for you. If you also go to this Kentucky History Research and you look at the menu there, you'll see my name, and I have an architectural database. I actually track over 3,000 buildings here in Jefferson County as to who designed them, when they were built, blah, blah, blah. And I try, whenever a new house or whatever house pops up, I will add it to my database. And the last time I gave this talk, one of the people in the audience checked their database, my database, and their house was in the database. So I had already done the history. But here's what I have. I list if I can find out who original owner was, the address, the designer. And I only track those houses that I can find the designer of, and then the year built, and then some notes about whatever it is, the building that I'm talking about. But I use this almost on a daily basis. And the reason I started doing this is I would constantly be asked questions about who did what, blah, 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 and I would get the same questions over and over again. And so I started very small, and now it's grown into this monster of a database. But I keep it at the library, the Filson Historical Society, and U of L has it on their system as well, so that people can go in and if you just know either your house number or your street name, you don't have to know any of the other data, but it's all searchable and findable if you know how Excel works. Go up to the find search engine thing and just put in a street number, and it'll pop up.
And, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and how do we get to that? It's not online, right?
No, you have to come to the library and you click on this little green tree is the icon you want to look at on these computers out there. You click on that and this huge menu comes up. One of them has city directories, my database on there, plus a lot of other. Here's one that says Louisville history. I've never looked at that. But a lot of information that they have on
That's where the library keeps their hard files, most hard files of historical documents.
So
What it looks like.
So there's my database there. Now then, another question I get is, do I have a ghost in my house?
Okay.
So how do you know if you have a ghost? What creates a ghost? Usually a traumatic death, like an accident, or like the Silbach Hotel, the most famous ghost there is the lady in blue. Her name was Patricia Wilson, I want to say. She fell down an elevator shaft there, and we don't know if it was an accident or a murder, but she's been seen down there ever since in the mid-1930s. But traumatic death, or burial site disturbance. So, traumatic death is pretty much identifiable if you go into your house history. I think nowadays realtors have to tell you if someone was murdered in your house. I think they now have to do that. They used to not have to do that. For instance, the house across from me, someone was murdered there a few years ago. And so I'm sure the realtors have to tell you that, but up until recent, they didn't have to say that. So you can go in and you may find out someone was killed in your house. That maybe explains your ghost situation. Or what we call burial site disturbance. Native American, slave, and sometimes the headstones are removed. We had some unscrupulous developers back in the 70s, and perhaps even the 80s, that would buy land, property outside the Snyder Freeway. There'd be a family cemetery on there. Again, these were unscrupulous people. They would take the headstones up and sell the property, and that there's no cemetery there. And so your house, a few years ago, they were digging a foundation for a house out in Jefferson County, and they dug up a casket when they were digging the basement. No one knew there was a cemetery there. And so your house could be built on top of a cemetery. Where are all the Native Americans buried here in Jefferson County? We named our parks after them, Shawnee, Iroquois, Cherokee. Where were they all buried at? So yeah, there's a lot of...
I have an unusual story about that. A friend of mine who lived on Hawthorne, I think it was, this story is about 30 years old, but she wanted to move to South Carolina to join her daughter, and she had a dirt basement, okay? And they did the home check, and the guy that was doing the home warranty check found out that there was a skeleton in that basement, and it turned out to be a Native American Indian, and the full body, and so,
There's still a lot of Native Americans buried out at the airport. There's some mounds out there. In fact, UPS has to route their planes around an Indian mound out there. There's an Indian mound out at Sutherland neighborhood, out off US 42. There used to be a huge, massive Indian mound in downtown Louisville, which no longer exists for various reasons. There's a lot of slave cemeteries in Jefferson County that unfortunately are not very well marked. We find them periodically, we designate them, but there's a lot of slave cemeteries that people, that used to be unfortunately identified with just small stones, and those stones are easily removed. So your house could be built on a cemetery or a burial location, and you might have a ghost because of that. Another good thing for doing house history is Library of Congress has a great map online. It's the 1858 map of Louisville. You go to loc.gov and you put in 1858 Louisville, and that map should pop up. And it looks like this. This is a section of it. It's a great map. Gosh, Bergman, who did this map, is just phenomenal. He deserves an award, because we historians use this map all the time. Where I have highlighted is where my house exists. Within that little yellow box is where my house is. But the map is all of Jefferson County. He has all the houses noted, who owned that property, all sorts of interesting information. And I highly recommend, if you're doing the research, to look into that and see sort of where your house was located, who might have owned that property. Sanborn maps, we were discussing that earlier. Again, you go to the little green icon on the computers, click on genealogy, local history, it says maps, and you go to the Sanborn maps between 1867 to 1970. And so what is a Sanborn map? Well, so if you go into the library, you have to select, it comes up to this menu page, Kentucky, Louisville. You select a date for what map you're looking for. I usually look at the 1905 map, but the 1892 map is fairly good as well. It comes up with usually one of the first sheets on a Sanborn. You have a title sheet, then you have an index here, and it names all the streets, and you have to find out which map. It's somewhat cumbersome. In fact, at the downtown library, Kelly Dunnigan does talks on Sanborns periodically. You may want to check into that if you're very much interested in it. I'm pretty familiar with Sanborns, but you can get into it and root around and find what you're looking for. And what a Sanborn map looks like is this. It has the houses located. This map up here is in Clifton area. This one is in Old Louisville. The houses in red are brick homes. The houses in yellow are wood-framed homes. They give dimensions. They give all sorts of information about the houses on there. There's little legends. But this is where I talk about the urban houses. This is primarily for inner city homes. They really didn't do the Sanborns pretty much outside the Waterston Expressway. And the reason for a Sanborn map is it's an insurance map for fires. After the Chicago fire back in the early 1870s, they realized they needed to start documenting what the city has from an insurance standpoint. In fact, if there was a major fire that would wipe out, or a tornado or a flood or whatever. So these were primarily used for insurance purposes. But for us historians, they're phenomenal information. So if you live in the inner city, you should be able to find your house, if it was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, on this map. Should give you some data. The reason why that's circled up there, I was doing a research for those homes for some reason many years ago. There's other neighborhood maps out there. This is one for Butchertown. I know there's one for Crescent Hill and Clifton areas. I'm sure probably there could be one for the Highlands here. Downtown Library has map drawers where a lot of these maps exist. You can go down and check them out. They're hard copies. Or you can just Google them. Sometimes you Google your neighborhood map and it may be online someplace out there. So I've given you a lot of information on past histories. We're going to have a lot more trouble going forward doing histories. And this is because the Courier Journal today unfortunately does not contain all the information that they used to contain. It's more of a newsletter, if you will, than it is a newspaper. So we've lost a lot of good research from that, and so going forward we won't be able to use a Courier as much as we might want it. Street directories do not contain as much information anymore as they once did. It's pretty much just the street address and the name of the person, but not the employer or some of the other data that we have. And we're getting more into what's called hidden ownerships. A lot of people are buying homes under LLCs and trusts. They're not putting their own names on these things anymore. There's a lot of hidden ownerships going on out there. It's driving us all nuts trying to figure out who owns these homes, who's buying this stuff. If you look at some of the more new McMansions being built out in East Jefferson, most of all of them are hidden ownerships. You don't know who's building these things. And I'll explain that in just a second. I'll go more into that in just a minute. Digital website, there's a lot of Zillow information, all that data. At some point, it's all going to disappear. It's all digital, and we're afraid that that data will go away at some point. And obituaries don't contain as much data as they used to. One thing that I've noticed is they don't really note the burial location much anymore. I don't know why they're not putting the burial locations there, but if you look at a lot of your obituaries nowadays, they don't list if they were buried in Cave Hill or Calvary or whatever. I don't know why that is, but put your burial location in your obit for us historians so we don't have to go search in various cemeteries to find out where you're at.
Maybe
Vince used to tell
cremations, maybe
what-
more people, because people are being cremated.
Cremated could be the reason. They're not actually being buried in cemeteries, exactly. But yeah, I've noticed that as a trend, and it's going to hurt us going forward.
Yeah, obits used to tell what the person died of.
Yeah, it would tell you.
Like died of cancer, died of diabetes, whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of personal information they no longer include in obituaries. Here's a good example here. I just saw some of these homes being listed. Notice the LLCs up there. There's Dogs LLC. Who is that? And then Greenberg Enterprises LLC. Who is that? I'm not sure if it's the mayor or not, but could be. But yeah, there's a lot of ways that they're trying to hide who's buying these homes. So here's a good example of that, about hidden ownership. So the Courier Journal last fall featured this house in their home section. It's a beautiful modern home. Me as an architect, I said, wow, who did that? Where is that located? I've never seen that before. But all it gave us was this guy's name and the company that he owned. I said, well, that should be easy, right? We'll just look up on the street directory as to where Rob Markham lives. Well, so we looked this up, and we go into the Secretary of State website, look up Mannix LLC, and it says that this Rob Markham lives on Breckenridge Lane, 974 Breckenridge Lane. I'm like, that dog don't hunt. That house is not at 974 Breckenridge Lane. So where does this guy live, and where's this house at that I've got to see? Now, one clue that it did give in this one article is that it was on like 450 acres of land. So I knew that it was outside the Snyder Freeway, but where, I'm guessing it was probably not on so much the Westport Road area, but probably out Bardstown Road, Fern Creek area maybe, where he could own 500 acres of land. So we go to the Courier, go to the library and click on the Jefferson County PVA. Let's look on that and see what's there. And it gives you different menu tabs, the address, parcel ID, legal, various things. We clicked on the owner and clicked on Mannix LLC. Let's see what Mannix LLC owns in PVA-wise. Mannix LLC owns all this property. And it gives you photographs of the property that they own. And there's my house right there. There's my address right there.
Oh, yeah.
So that's one way we were able to find it. But going forward, you know, on these LLCs, this Secretary of State website in, say, 50 years won't contain that information as such. That will probably go away, so whoever buys this house down the road, but I put it on my database, so if someone's looking for the history. And the other thing I was looking at for this was who's the architect for this house? How can we find that out? And I have I have numerous people out, I have sources out in the
Before you
community.
go on,
Yeah,
so that looks like it's really a house on 40 acres and they're building 40-acre lots out
yeah. He actually owns 500 acres and it's at the southeast intersection of Snyder and Billtown. So he's bought that chunk of land right there. And by the way, if you go out there, you cannot see this house from the road whatsoever. I mean, it is gated off and you don't even know it's there. But yeah, he's deeded all 40 acres for the house, but the other
there. But
acres.
every house around it's 40 acres too.
So he'll probably, yeah, you're right, he'll probably have either a subdivision out there at some point or some sort of commercial deal. But yeah, interesting. So so you go on to, again, the PVA site, look at the floor plan of this house and all that, gives you all that information that it has there. I was talking, a friend of mine knew something about this house. He referenced the architect to me. The architect is actually from St. George, Utah, who designed this house. So
It looks like a firehouse.
it's very modern.
He's also taken a farm deduction on the plans.
What's he doing? Oh yeah, farm.
Yeah,
It's a farmhouse.
Farmhouse,
yeah,
yes.
right.
Steve, do PVA records, can you go back and look at what the PVA record was for 1910? Or
Well, yeah, that's a good question. That I do not know how. I'm not had to look into that sort of do that historical research, but I'm guessing it could be that you could do that. But yeah, it's going to be a challenge into the future. But yeah, as these come up, we're able to document them and search them now. But in the future, I don't know if we're able to do that. And they probably can, but you probably have to go to Frankfurt and or down at the courthouse to check some archive, something about that. So in summary, just kind of summarize everything we've gone over here tonight. The deed room, you can try deed research, but that's complicated and messy. Google your address, the PVA website at the library, city directories, newspaper research, burial information, neighborhood history books, my database, do you have any ghosts, and old maps, and the Kentucky Secretary of State website. So those are the ways that I've gone about searching those. If y'all have any others that you want to contribute, feel free to do so. But there's my information, books, and questions. Yes?